It started with a notice taped to my front door. Bold red letters screaming eviction. The problem? I owned the house. The HOA claimed I violated community standards, but no one could tell me which ones. 1 week later, they froze my access to the neighborhood gate, fined me daily, and even listed my property for auction, all without warning. I thought it was a mistake. Then I found out one of the board members wanted my home for herself. What she didn't expect was how far I'd go to fight back, and the courtroom twist that left everyone speechless. So tell me, what would you do if your own HOA tried to steal your house? When my husband and I first moved into Willow Creek Estates, it felt like we'd finally made it. Quiet streets lined with manicured lawns, kids riding bikes in the cul-de-sac, and neighbors who waved every morning like clockwork. It wasn't the fanciest neighborhood, but it had that picture-perfect charm we'd always dreamed of. After years of saving and renting, we'd bought our forever home, a small 2-story with a white porch swing and a maple tree that turned gold every fall. The HOA was part of the deal, of course, but at first it seemed harmless. Monthly newsletters about lawn care tips, summer BBQs by the community pool, and friendly reminders to keep the neighborhood beautiful. We didn't think much of it. Everyone said the HOA kept things organized, and the board meetings were supposedly open and fair. Then came Karen Whitmore, the newly elected HOA president. She was the kind of neighbor who knew everyone's business before you did. Always in pastel blazers, always with that fixed, polite smile that never reached her eyes. At first, her rules seemed small. No trash cans left out past 8 p.m. No wreaths that clash with the community aesthetic, and absolutely no unapproved paint colors. We laughed it off. Until one morning, Karen showed up at our door with a clipboard and a warning. Apparently, our mailbox, a simple black one we'd installed years ago, didn't meet the new HOA standard. A fine would follow if we didn't replace it immediately. It was strange, but we complied. After all, it was just a mailbox. But soon, little notes began appearing on our door. Warnings about our yard height, driveway stains, even the small flower bed by the fence that she claimed was unauthorized landscaping. Each message carried a colder tone, as if someone wanted us gone. We tried to ignore it, but whispers started spreading rumors about how Karen wanted to revitalize the community, starting with certain non-compliant homes. That's when the letters turned into legal notices, and our dream neighborhood started to feel more like a trap than a home. Something told me this wasn't about grass or paint, it was about power. And soon, I'd find out just how far the HOA was willing to go to take what was ours. At first, I tried to believe it was just a misunderstanding. Maybe the new HOA president, Karen Whitmore, simply being overzealous. Maybe she wanted to prove herself in her new role. But within weeks, that illusion shattered. It started with small things. A bright orange notice taped to our door claiming we had violated Section 4A, exterior appearance. Apparently, a single cracked tile on our roof was considered aesthetic damage. We were given 7 days to fix it, or face a $200 fine. I remember standing in the driveway, holding that paper in my hands, reading it over and over, trying to understand how something so trivial could matter so much. I replaced the tile immediately, but the notices didn't stop. The next week, another letter arrived, this time for overgrown grass. The grass wasn't even an inch higher than usual. Then another for improperly stored recycling bins. Each violation came with a fine, each fine a little higher than the last. Karen's tone grew colder with every message she left. She'd walk by our house during her morning jogs, clipboard in hand, jotting notes like a police officer gathering evidence. The once friendly neighbors who used to wave now turned their heads. It was as if they knew something I didn't. Asterisk. Then came the first board meeting. I showed up determined to clear my name. But as soon as I stepped into the community hall, I realized the game was already rigged. Karen sat at the center table with two other board members, both of whom seemed more interested in nodding along than actually listening. I presented photos of my home, evidence that I had followed every rule. Karen smiled politely and said, "We appreciate your input," then moved to the next agenda item without discussion. The audience, mostly neighbors, avoided eye contact. A few whispered quietly among themselves. That's when I noticed a stack of folders on the table labeled non-compliance cases. My name was one of them. From that day forward, everything I did seemed to invite another citation. My husband's truck parked slightly over the driveway line. Unauthorized vehicle placement. The small wind chime on our porch. Noise nuisance. Even the holiday lights we put up that winter, something every other house had, were suddenly unauthorized decorations. The fines added up fast, hundreds, then thousands. And when I tried to pay them to keep the peace, Karen returned the checks, claiming they were under review. It didn't make sense. It was like she wanted the balance to grow. Weeks turned into months, and the pressure started to feel personal. We received letters from the HOA attorney warning that our continued violations could result in property liens. That's when fear turned into anger. I began documenting everything, every letter, every notice. Every time Karen or her board cronies walked by snapping photos of our yard. Then one afternoon, something pushed me over the edge. I came home to find a for sale pending HOA approval sign staked into my front lawn. I hadn't listed my home. No realtor had contacted me. When I called the number on the sign, it led straight to Karen's office. I confronted her at the next meeting. My voice shook, but I refused to back down. She didn't flinch. She simply leaned back in her chair, folded her arms, and said, "You've made this difficult for yourself. The HOA reserves the right to take action against repeat offenders." That phrase, "take action," echoed in my head for days. And then the final blow came, an eviction notice, stamped with official HOA letterhead. It claimed I was in long-standing breach of contract and that the association had initiated foreclosure proceedings. I couldn't breathe when I read it. My husband thought it had to be a mistake, an empty threat. But the legal seal and the attorney's signature said otherwise. They weren't playing games anymore. We tried to reach the county office, only to find that a lien had already been filed under our property. The HOA had been building a case for months, using the unpaid under-review fines as justification. They claimed we owed over $18,000. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by a mountain of papers, trying to make sense of how this had spiraled so far. Every email, every document I reread showed a patterned, deliberate manipulation. Karen wasn't enforcing community rules. She was targeting us. But why? I started asking questions quietly at first. Some neighbors avoided me. Others whispered that Karen had done similar things before, pushing out families under the guise of neighborhood improvement. Rumor had it she'd already forced out to others and sold their foreclosed homes to people she personally knew. The next morning, I received an anonymous envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a printed email chain between Karen and another board member discussing how Lot 27, our address, would be a perfect flip. My hands shook as I read those words. That was the proof I needed, and the moment I realized this wasn't just harassment, it was fraud. I hired a lawyer, quiet, meticulous man named Daniel, who specialized in HOA disputes. He reviewed everything and nodded slowly. "They've overstepped," he said, "but this will get ugly before it gets better." He wasn't wrong. The HOA doubled down, issuing new fines almost daily. Karen even hired an inspector who claimed our fence was encroaching on community property, a claim that turned out to be false. But the intimidation worked. The residents stopped talking to us altogether. Some even started repeating Karen's lines that we were troublemakers and refused to follow the rules. Every time I drove through the gates of Willow Creek, I could feel the weight of her eyes watching from behind those spotless white curtains. When the court summons finally arrived, I wasn't even surprised. The HOA was suing us for non-compliance and property violations. They wanted full ownership of our home through foreclosure. Karen's name was right there on the documents in bold. But what she didn't know was that I had kept everything. Every letter, every voicemail, every email. My lawyer filed a countersuit, accusing the HOA of fraudulent liens, harassment, and abuse of authority. The board meetings grew quieter after that. Karen stopped making her morning rounds. But I could feel something brewing, something bigger than fines and threats. A week before the trial, I received another anonymous message. A neighbor, someone who had once been on Karen's good side, slipped me a USB drive. "You didn't get this from me?" the note read. When I plugged it in, my screen filled with internal HOA emails. And there it was, undeniable proof. Karen had been falsifying fine amounts, fabricating inspection reports, and colluding with a real estate partner to acquire problem properties below market value. My stomach dropped. It was worse than I'd imagined. She wasn't just targeting me. She was running a quiet empire built on intimidation and technicalities. We brought everything to court. Karen showed up confident, polished, with that same icy smile. She didn't know what was coming. The moment the evidence hit the judge's desk, her expression faltered for the first time. And as the courtroom filled with whispers, I finally felt something I hadn't felt in months: control. The hearing hadn't even reached its peak yet, but I could tell, this time, Karen was the one cornered, because the truth was finally out, and the courtroom twist waiting to unfold would change everything. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not in temperature, but in tension. Every sound echoed. The shuffle of papers, the click of heels on the tile, the creak of wooden benches. The judge hadn't even taken the stand yet, but the room was already thick with unspoken war. Karen sat across from me at the plaintiff's table, a pastel blue blazer perfectly pressed, a stack of folders aligned like soldiers. Her expression was smug, the kind of quiet confidence that said she'd already won. Behind her sat two HOA board members, both avoiding my gaze. I wondered if they knew what was about to happen. When the judge finally entered, everyone stood. "You may be seated," he said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made the air itself feel heavier. Karen's attorney went first. He spoke smoothly, theatrically, painting me as a habitually non-compliant homeowner who willfully ignored the association's efforts to maintain community standards. He presented a slideshow of photographs: my mailbox, my driveway, my flower bed. Each image looked innocent, but the captions made them sound like crimes. Repeated violations, he emphasized, that forced the HOA to act. I sat still, my jaw clenched, every nerve in my body screaming to speak, but Daniel, my lawyer, gave a subtle shake of his head. "Wait," his eyes said. Then it was our turn. Daniel stood, calm but sharp. "Your Honor," he began, "this case isn't about a homeowner breaking rules. It's about a homeowner being targeted systematically by someone who abused her power for personal gain." Karen's smile faltered just slightly. He handed the judge a folder, thick, tabbed, and color-coded. "Inside, you'll find documentation of over 20 separate citations issued without cause, emails showing intentional manipulation of fine records, and communication suggesting collusion between the HOA president and a private real estate investor." The judge's brow furrowed. "Collusion?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. My client's home was one of several properties identified by the HOA president as potential flips. The HOA's fines were used as leverage to force families out, after which the properties were resold, often to associates of the same board members." Karen's attorney objected, but Daniel was ready. He raised his voice slightly, not in anger, but in precision. "Your Honor, these claims aren't speculation. They're backed by written correspondence directly from the HOA president's own email. The room went silent. He gestured to the monitor as the first email appeared on screen, the one I'd found on that USB drive. Karen's name, her signature. And her words, Lot 27 would be a perfect flip if we can move the owners out before Q2. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Karen's composure cracked. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table, knuckles whitening. Her attorney whispered frantically, but she didn't respond. Daniel continued, clicking through more exhibits, falsified inspection reports, doctored fine amounts, even meeting minutes that had been rewritten after approval. The pattern was undeniable. The HOA, he concluded, didn't just overstep. They weaponized bureaucracy. They turned a system meant to protect homeowners into a tool for profit and control. The judge leaned back in his chair, silent for a long moment. You could almost hear the clock ticking on the wall. Then Karen spoke, breaking the stillness like glass shattering. Those emails were taken out of context, she blurted. The board approved every decision we made. I was simply enforcing community standards. Daniel's tone remained even. Would you like us to display the financial records showing deposits from your real estate partner into your personal account? Karen froze. Her attorney looked blindsided. My client was unaware of. She was very aware. Daniel cut in, placing another document on the judge's desk. A recorded conversation between Mrs. Whitmore and her associate. Discussing how to push homeowners who didn't fit her vision of Willow Creek? I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until then. The entire courtroom seemed to lean forward. The judge's tone hardened. Mrs. Whitmore, is this true? Karen hesitated, her eyes darting between her lawyer, the board members, and the screen still glowing with her own words. I was just trying to keep the neighborhood's value up, she stammered. Daniel didn't let her off. By illegally seizing homes. By threatening families with foreclosure over mailbox colors and flower beds. Her silence said everything. That was the turning point. The judge called for a brief recess, but everyone knew what it meant. Karen slumped in her chair, no longer the unflappable HOA queen. The board members whispered nervously behind her. A few neighbors in attendance, the ones who had once backed her, started to shift uncomfortably. Realizing what they'd been part of? When the court resumed, the judge's verdict was deliberate, final, and sharp as a blade. Based on the evidence presented, he said, "This court finds the HOA guilty of fraudulent conduct, abuse of authority, and malicious intent. The foreclosure proceedings against the defendant are null and void." He turned toward me. Furthermore, the defendant is entitled to full restoration of property rights and financial restitution. And then? The words I'll never forget, the ones that made the entire courtroom erupt in murmurs. As for Mrs. Whitmore, this court recommends a formal investigation into her financial dealings with the HOA and affiliated real estate entities. Karen's face drained of color. The smugness that once defined her was gone, replaced by disbelief and humiliation. She tried to speak, but her voice broke. The judge had already moved on. As we left the courtroom, reporters and residents whispered among themselves. Some offered quiet apologies. Others avoided eye contact altogether. The same people who once judged me now looked at me with something different: respect, maybe even guilt. But the most unforgettable moment came as I stepped outside into the sunlight. Karen was standing near the courthouse steps, surrounded by flashing cameras and microphones. Her once pristine blazer looked rumpled. Her eyes frantic as reporters shouted questions about embezzlement and abuse of power. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Our eyes met for a second, long enough for her to know I wasn't the one who lost. Justice had, for once, spoken louder than her rules. But even as I walked away, a part of me couldn't shake the thought how many others had she done this to. How many families never had the chance to fight back? That thought lingered, a reminder that even when you win, the scars from a war like this don't fade easily. Still, in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: peace. The home they tried to take was still mine. The truth they tried to bury was finally out. And as the courthouse doors closed behind me, one question remained echoing in my mind. One that would shape everything that came next. If someone like Karen could manipulate the system this easily, how many more HOAs across the country were doing the same thing right now? When the gavel came down and the courtroom emptied, I thought the nightmare was finally over. But I quickly learned that justice, even when it's served, doesn't erase the damage, it only exposes it. In the days that followed the verdict, the story of Willow Creek's corrupt HOA spread faster than wildfire. Local news stations ran headlines like "Homeowner Wins Landmark Case Against Predatory HOA" and "HOA President Accused of Fraud and Property Exploitation." For the first time in months, people were talking about the truth. Not the rumors, not the lies Karen had built her little empire on, but the reality of what she'd done. Neighbors who once avoided me started showing up at my door, awkwardly clutching coffee cups or homemade pies, trying to apologize. Some said they were scared to speak up, that Karen had threatened to fine them too. Others admitted they had believed her version of events, that we were troublemakers who didn't respect community values. It was strange at first, seeing their faces again. The same people who had turned away when I needed them now stood on my porch asking for forgiveness. I didn't hold grudges. I just listened. Because beneath their guilt, I saw the same fear that had once kept me silent. The fear of standing up to power when you feel like you have none. A few days later, I received an official letter from the county clerk's office. The lien on our property had been removed. For the first time in a year, our home was truly ours again. No legal threats, no fines, no orange notices taped to the door. But the impact went far beyond my house. The judge's ruling had triggered an investigation, not just into Karen, but into the entire Willow Creek HOA board. Investigators uncovered years of shady financial transactions, including inflated maintenance fees and vendor payments that led straight to Karen's personal account. It turned out she had been using HOA funds to remodel her own home, right down to the marble countertops she once bragged about at board meetings. When the district attorney filed charges, it felt surreal watching it unfold on the evening news. Karen, the same woman who once called my mailbox an eyesore, was now facing fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of authority charges. Her pastel blazers and perfect smile were gone. The woman who used to strut through the neighborhood with a clipboard now walked into court in handcuffs. And while I didn't revel in her downfall, I couldn't deny the sense of poetic justice. She had built her entire identity around controlling others, and now she had lost control of everything. Within months, the HOA board was dissolved. A new temporary committee was formed, this time led by residents who had seen enough to know better. Transparency became the new rule. All financial records were made public, meeting minutes were recorded and posted online, and homeowners finally had a voice. The first time I attended one of those new meetings, it felt like walking into an entirely different world. People actually listened. Disagreements didn't turn into threats. The fear that had once hung over the neighborhood like a storm cloud was gone. We had survived it, but not without scars. Even after Karen was gone, I found myself jumping at small things. A knock at the door, a letter in the mailbox, the sound of footsteps on the sidewalk. For months, those sounds had meant trouble. Now they meant normal life, but my body hadn't learned the difference yet. It took time. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset spill across the cul-de-sac, I thought about how close we'd come to losing everything. Not just the house, but the peace, the sense of safety, the belief that decency could still win. That's the part most people don't understand about HOA abuse. It's not just about property lines and paperwork. It's about control. It's about how easily power, when unchecked, can twist something as simple as a neighborhood rule into a weapon. After the trial, Daniel, my lawyer, called to check in. "You did something bigger than just keeping your home," he said. "This case is going to be cited for years. You've given people a way to fight back." He was right. Within months, other homeowners started reaching out. Some from nearby communities, some from other states. They'd seen my story online or heard it through forums, and they wanted advice. They were tired of being bullied, tired of paying into systems that turned against them. I wasn't a lawyer, but I started helping where I could. Sharing my documentation, connecting people to resources, and warning them about the same tricks Karen had used. What began as survival turned into advocacy. One woman from Arizona told me her HOA had tried to fine her for installing solar panels, even though the state had laws protecting homeowners' rights to do so. Another man in Texas said his HOA claimed his garden was a fire hazard because they wanted to use his property for new development. The stories were endless, each one eerily familiar. It made me realize that Willow Creek wasn't an isolated case. It was part of a bigger pattern, a quiet epidemic of power without accountability. And that's when I made a choice. I created a small online group, a place where homeowners could share their experiences, swap advice, and find legal help. Within a few weeks, hundreds joined. Within months, there were thousands. People started calling it the HOA Resistance Network. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who once got fined for a mailbox now running a movement that exposed corrupt HOAs across the country. Through it all, I still lived in the same house. The same maple tree still turned gold every fall. The same porch swing still creaked in the breeze. But the view felt different now. It wasn't just my home anymore. It was a reminder that sometimes standing your ground isn't about winning a fight. It's about refusing to be silenced. Karen eventually pled guilty to multiple counts of fraud and misuse of community funds. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison and barred from holding any position in a homeowners association again. When I heard the news, I didn't feel joy, just closure. The kind of quiet relief that comes when you finally stop looking over your shoulder. But the fallout in Willow Creek went deeper. The property values dropped temporarily, then rebounded as new leadership took over. People started repainting their homes, planting gardens again, putting up decorations that had once been banned. For the first time in years, the neighborhood actually looked alive, imperfect, colorful, human. It was like watching a community wake up from a long sleep. One day, as I walked down the street, a new family waved from their front yard. "We heard you're the one who took on the HOA," the husband said, smiling. "You're kind of a legend around here." I laughed, but part of me knew he wasn't wrong. The fight had changed me, not just as a homeowner, but as a person. I'd learned that silence only feeds bullies, and that sometimes the smallest act of defiance, saving one email, filing one complaint, refusing to pay one unfair fine, can unravel an entire web of corruption. Months later, I stood in front of my house again, looking at the porch where it all began. The maple tree rustled softly in the breeze, sunlight flickering through its leaves. The world had gone back to normal, but I hadn't. I'd lost sleep, money, and trust, but I'd gained something more valuable: a voice. And as I watched the neighborhood kids ride their bikes past the corner where Karen once took her morning walks, I realized something profound. The real victory wasn't just keeping my home. It was proving that even in the most controlled, rule-bound communities, people still have power, the kind that can't be taken by fines or threats or bureaucracy. So if you're watching this and you've ever felt powerless in your own home, remember my story. Stand your ground. Document everything. Don't let fear write the ending for you. Because the moment you stop playing by their rules, that's when you start winning. And as for me, Every time I see that old porch swing move in the wind, I'm reminded of one simple truth. They tried to take my house, but instead, they gave me something far greater: the courage to fight back,